Om yo brahmanan vidadati purvam yo vai vedanscha prahinohi tasmai tanha deva atma buddhi prakasha mumokshurvai sharnamham prapadje. Om shantihi shantihi shantihi. That one formless, indivisible presence, out of which sprang the Trinity at the beginning of a cosmic cycle, and who delivered the Vedas unto Lord Brahma. Who is partless, formless, actionless and divine, who is an eternal bridge to immortality, who resembles fire that has consumed all its fuel. I go for refuge to that Supreme Brahman who turns the attention of mankind to the light of the Atman, the indivisible self in all things. Om, peace, peace, peace. May peace be unto us, may peace be unto all. Om Hari Om, Hari Om, Hari Om Tat Sat. We are now at our third class since Ramavami 3 Sundays ago, Easter being last Sunday's class. And we'll probably have a series of 4 or 5 classes. It would probably take more than that to finish everything that we're looking at. Basically centered around this young man who is a veiled avatar of the Treta Yuga, looking into the situation of suffering in human beings. That avatar, as he was at the end of the Treta Yuga, if we look at him in his next incarnation that we know about as Sri Krishna at the end of the Dwapara Yuga, ushering in the Kali Yuga, then we see that the situation has changed. So it rather makes sense when they describe the loss of memory of living beings over these cycles of time. Loss of divine memory, Daivi Smrita. Because that's very important to India, to remember your lineage, your ancestors way back, not just a few generations. Because India is so long-lived and its philosophy is so ancient, its religion is eternal, Sanatana Dharma. So we find the 2 different situations reflected well in Ram's time and then his next incarnation with Sri Krishna. I was thinking about it earlier, is that you can see by what he's talking about here that Sri Ram is telling people that there's suffering out there that maybe they're not aware of. And they probably are going to need to remedy it soon, because it could exacerbate then and get worse. So he's talking about this in the luxury of the court of King Dasaratha, his father. But Krishna is on a battlefield later and speaking in between 2 great armies, the battlefield of Kurukshetra. And his message is coming in terms of, well, look what you're into now. I told you back in the early Yuga that you're going to have to get rid of things like Ajnana. You're going to have to use Vivarta, use Viveka to get rid of Vivarta, and root ignorance, and these desires that are like a troop of monkeys running through the mind, as he says in Yoga Vasishtha. If you don't take care of them now, they're going to get worse. And so you see in Krishna's time, although the division between, say, good and bad, the good guys and the bad guys out on the battlefield, the 2 armies, in terms of the Pandavas and the Kaurava clan, we see that even on the good side of things, that the Kauravas have got themselves the Pandavas have got themselves into a fix because of problems like Yudhishthira's gambling and so forth. If you read the Ramayana and then you read the Mahabharata, you begin to pick up on a lot of the inner dynamics of what's going on through time in India. It's a very good reflector for the rest of the world, all the way up to present time, when in this age the actions are not very well thought, and the impetus behind everything is more obviously from the standpoint of greed and violence, which is there in all the yugas, but some of the people are escaping the problems of this by doing their sadhana, by keeping up their spiritual discipline, and mainly, as I was just saying, keeping their memories sharp, their intellects honed, their minds in a non-dual state. So this reflects itself well as we look at this one being in two different yugas, Sri Ram and then Sri Krishna, one in the luxury of the Koshala kingdom and the King Dasaratha's court, and the next on the battlefield there, with the message being one of war and violence and how to do Dharma or return to Dharma. Because Krishna at that time is saying, well, all of this isn't just the fault of human beings, there's also the natural process of things that from age to age the Dharma declines. Yuge cha Dharma sha. But earlier on, Sri Ram is trying to remind them of something that's still a bit far away from them, because they've attained this closeness to their ideal being a peaceful life, a dharmic life, and a noble king like Dasaratha, and who had great sons that were examples of the highest dharma in the world. So it's interesting to look at that contrast and see the differences. So if we take it, then generally speaking, that Sri Ram is speaking more on the level of individual suffering and karmas that are accruing, if you're not going to make some adjustments to these problems that are showing up, in this case outside the castle walls where the common people are suffering. Lord Buddha later on was noticing the same thing, called the Four Signs, outside of his own father's castle, and he went for a ride for the first time as a young man in the carriage and saw a diseased man and dying man and the corpse burning on a funeral pyre, and he saw a monk too had renounced it all. So these are all signs, great signs, and they occur in every age. So I'm warming us up here to the topic again, because 6 days have passed since, and doesn't everything get created in 6 days? So we're back here recreating Ram's Leela again. But inside of Ram's Leela is this message of Ram's Dharma, Rama Leela, Rama Dharma. And that's what he's pointing to, because he's seen the signs. Early on, in a very early age, when people were supposed to have 2/3 of their spiritual memory still in hand, in mind that is, and so they shouldn't be making these poor decisions, would be a good word for it today. They should be trying to avoid war at all costs, which they're not nowadays. And violence shouldn't even be considered an option until it's forced upon somebody. And even then there are ways of negotiating around it. So this is how time figures in to the factor. You can see here, kala, time, just down there at the bottom of this chart, and it reminds me that we should get moving along this list. We won't have to say a lot about some of these, because Ram puts it in a capsule, but you can see here as we look at this chart, this cover chart that we're using, we've already looked at Vivarta, false superimposition, covers the real with the unreal. It's like blue in the sky, or you could say blue in an ocean even, and mirage in a desert. It's remedied by always keeping in mind that Brahman is not in the world is in Brahman. if you start thinking in terms of, as we were talking at satsang just yesterday morning, what Vivekananda said when he came here, you are not in nature. Nature has come out of you, or you have not come out of nature. It's just the appearance of it, because if you think you're the body and solid objects is the goal and so forth, it seems like this has all come out of nature, but the whole Prakriti has an unmanifested side, and your thoughts, the thoughts of the collective consciousness brought that about and solidified it. So in the mind-only schools, they're thinking nature came out of us, and it has two sides. And if you know the second side, you can figure this out eventually and get away from unacceptable and untenable ideas like that God is a creator, when Vivekananda has told us God is a creator, and tried to get us used to this idea of the mind projecting. It's called sankalpa, and it might as well be on this list, and it is in a sense when we get to samskaras. But here we looked at Vivarta 2 weeks ago, and Ajnana we looked at after that, root ignorance. If you had that freedom from mula vidya, root ignorance, then you would have this divine wisdom, divine mother wisdom. And the source of all misery and suffering then would be removed, and you can see that manifesting in illumined people's lives. Even people who are just awakening to spirituality are having very wonderful lives, and quickly finding solutions, as Ram has done here, or is doing for the people listening to his discourse of divine discontent. They're finding solutions for these problems in this very lifetime, which is why these great messengers come to us. I remember Holy Mother saying, what's the use of saying, aha, see, I told you so, after the problem has already occurred? You have to, if you're a true friend, you come forward and say, you might want to reconsider that, maybe don't do that act, that's not a good decision, I'm saying this for your own good. You've heard it before probably, or heard the advice given, particularly from wise elders to as yet unlearned or unawakened souls, young souls. But that's of course not the case here. It's tables turned. Ram is the young awakened soul, and everyone else is living in the state of hypnotism, taking the unreal to be the real. So Vivarta and Ajnana are the first two things he brings out, because he's been schooled by the Brahmin priests at the court. So he doesn't just hear these teachings and forget them, walk away and forget them. He's listening very intently to great souls who happen to be priests by vocation, like Vasishtha, and listening very deeply to them. It's pressing itself. Then he went out and had the direct experience of what the scripture said about suffering. So he's put these two and two together, and other people are still living sort of behind a veil of hypnotism. As Vivekananda said, well, it's just, brush the dirt I swept up under the carpet, cover the dead carcass with roses kind of thing, and pretend that it's okay. So that's where ignorance is not bliss at all. It's future trouble. Bliss in India, if you said ignorance is bliss to somebody who's a knower of Brahman, of course they would just laugh. And they'd want to capitalize bliss, because there is a kind of bliss that comes and goes that's kind of beside the point of non-duality. It's even an obstacle, the father of yoga says, on the way to realization. But this bliss with a capital B, that beautiful word ananda, that's something of a completely different level. That's actually the nature of Brahman, Sat, Chit, Ananda. It's pure existence, it's pure knowledge, and it's pure bliss at the highest level, beyond levels even. So those first two are getting mentioned over and over again, so we can get into this third level of teachings that he's talking about, the vasanas, or the desires. And I have been looking in the scripture to come forth with exactly little things, what he said about it, directly from the source. And here we have it. He's talking about desires. He says, my noble friends and companions, here at the court, he's talking about, I am being continually burnt like dry wood piled high upon the raging fires of desire and other passions. The darkness of undue desire causes even the wise heart to flutter, like a bird caught in a net. Even the discriminating eye fails to see in the oncoming gloom brought about by inordinate desire. Like the aging legs of a master dancer, which still yearn to cut capers, despite of the lack of strength and control in them, so too do the desires that occupy the mind as a matter of course move me in my own lack of mental mastery. Verily, I liken desires to a tribe of migrating monkeys who never come to rest for any reason, in any place, for any given length of time. Restless, that is the very nature of this mind. And in that restlessness, the presence of desires bring forth deep inner parts of the dual mind that were much better off left undisturbed. Like venomous snakes leaping in dark caves. Though seemingly tiny, such a minuscule germ that eventually kills a massive elephant, these desires that pepper the mind are exceedingly hard to resist, like the diamond tip of Yama's sword of death. Who would be so reckless as to meddle with them or create for them any room to incubate in the weak, submissive, dual mind? Boy, that's a mouthful. And so if you heard that from an enlightened soul and a young man who's shining with the light of renunciation, who has had this teaching from the Brahman peace from a young age, and of course who's a past master, we won't mention that right now, had this teaching and then went out and saw it face to face. When you go on pilgrimage, especially in those times, you go away from comforts, which is what Sri Ram did in that age and what Lord Buddha did too in the later age. And so you're really exposed to it. You're living right there with these people who are going through these problems of suffering. And it wouldn't take anyone very long who is astute to figure out that, oh, that's why you're suffering. You've got these inordinate desires running through your mind like a troop of migrating monkeys. And they say sometimes in songs in India, my mind is like a monkey that drank too much liquor, found some liquor, you see, drank it, and then it got stung by a hive of bees, and it got up in the tree doing things it shouldn't do. And then it's suffering, and it's dizzy, and it's falling down. So they liken those decisions and what happens to life to metaphors like that. So that's very powerful, and you can see that here he's talking again and again about the dual mind. So he'll talk about manas sud, we're getting to that. But he's talking about duality, and so there are songs that bring this to bear. Like this one. Etani vinati raghunandana se dukha sandha hamara vitauji. Etani vinati raghunandana se dukha dandva hamara vitauji. Dukha dandva hamara vitauji. Dukha danva hamara dhitauji. Dukha danva hamara vitauji. Dukha dandva hamara vitauji. Itani vinati raghunandana se. This is my prayer to thee, Raghunanda. So he's praying to Ram. This is a great song, very famous, by Tulsidas. And so he's praying to Ram, O Ram, kindly destroy my mind's tendency to perceive duality, and remove all sorrows and sufferings thereby arising because of desires in my mind. Because Atman alone abides, nothing else exists but that. It is attachment to relativity that gives birth to the miseries of life. So you can have it in the scripture, you can have it told you by an illumined soul, you can hear it in a song that's been written by somebody to their ishtam, to their chosen ideal. But it comes to you as that sour in the beginning, sweet later on, as Krishna talks about in the Gita. That's what you want. You want to hear this truth. And if you're in comfort, like Ram and Buddha were, and something doesn't quite feel right because others aren't enjoying that same level of freedom from suffering and mastery of desires, and aren't getting the teachings that you were fortunate enough to give because of your past good karmas, then you want to move to try and remedy this situation. So this is what he says about desires, and what the scriptures say. Very profound scripture there, Yoga Vasishtha, and also what the teachings of the Dharma say. So let's go to that first to take desire to task right now in this class. We look at this very good example out of Yoga Vasishtha scripture. You can see his quote at the beginning, which is really powerful. Jivas, embodied beings, arise out of a Brahman state with no cause, but cause and effect come to them due performing desire-based karmas. So Lord Vasishtha's opinion is that if you keep the mind, as we were just singing, in a non-dual state, always fixed upon Brahman, and keep the ignorance that we talked about at bay with the Dharmic teachings, and concentrate on the feet of the Lord in your devotions and meditation in your non-dual aspirations, then you just come out of the Brahman state without cause. This is illustrated by the chart. There you see the Brahman state at the top, and then the jivas rising from Brahman. But you see one side of them is going towards engaging in mental projection, off to the left, and the right side is going towards the Jivan Mukta state. That is, we're living liberated now. There's no difference between our state and Brahman. We just took on some adages here called body-mind mechanism, and we're going to go sport in this existence. It's called Leela, and then we will return to Brahman immediately without accruing any karma. That's off to the right. It's very beautiful the way Lord Vasishtha teaches, and he'll, as I said last week, and I want to bring it forward again, is that remember, after this diatribe has been transmitted to the people there, as well as the people in the next ether, the next Akasha are listening, remember, because they'll shower flowers on the whole congregation after this discourse is over. After that happens, Sri Ram is not faking it. He's saying, I'm really suffering here. You can see by some of the instances in the scripture, I'm really suffering here because of the suffering of others. I want to find a remedy for that. And because of that, then Vasishtha will take him later and give him teachings, and that's what the Lagu Yoga Vasishtha is about. The Briha Lagu Vasishtha is the huge. I mean, you wouldn't even be able to lift it. This is the slimmed down version of Yoga Vasishtha, down to the quintessential stories that are very pertinent to what we want to learn in this day and age, really. I don't think the full Yoga Vasishtha has ever been translated into English, so there are always these Lagu, or versions of them, that are slimmed down. So, all of this going to say that if you have to slim something down like that, then you'd want to give a teaching like this. Doesn't it follow? You're perfect. You're pure and perfect. You are Brahman. So, you rise out of Brahman and you go back to Brahman. It's like name and form comes to you, say, what a nice expression of Brahman, and then you give it up and go back to your formless nature again. It's sort of like waking in deep sleep, only free of dreams. maybe the dream was that you sported a little bit between the two. So waking, dreaming, and deep sleep is an Advaitic or non-dual way of teaching non-attachment, really, to everything that's phenomenal, everything that's sensational. And even getting beyond having to fall into misery and suffering, and then taking the trouble to have to get out of it because you think it's real. The whole thing starts out Advaitically then. That's why I really like this chart. But we have to follow the track of why suffering is coming about. So let's do that. If the jiva is rising out of Brahman, they engage in mental projection. Well, bad idea, as sometimes they say. You might want to think about that, or your mental projection should be very masterful if you do it, because there are souls who can do that. What does the yogi do, the Avadhuta Gita says, with his mental projections? Oh, he just lets them rise naturally. And then he dissolves them back at the end of the day into Brahman, like bubbles into water. Buddhischa yata jale. Jale is water. And Buddhist is like bubbles. Even sounds in Sanskrit like the English words. So the yogi will also engage in this mental projection, Leela Sankalpa they call it. That's maybe more on the other side here. And then they'll just dissolve it all back into the formless Brahman, because that's the reality. All is Brahman. And that realization is the end-all and be-all of everything. Scriptures, life, practice, existence. And that's the one conclusion that they come up with. All is Brahman. All this is Brahman. Sarvam Kalvidam Brahman. And then the Mahavakyas come out of that, and that's to remind people, thou art that, aham brahmasmi, or I am Atma Brahma, I am this Atman, this self is Brahman. This apparently individualized self that we're calling a jiva here is actually Brahman. You should not forget that as you work your way away from that. So association with Maya brings about Brahman's Maya. Brahman is free, really, and ever free and never bound. The Maya will appear in Brahman and even sometimes perplex Brahman, tongue-in-cheek, as Ramakrishna used to say. Even Brahman gets caught in the snare of its own Maya, but it's its own Maya. Like the snake has poison in it, but that probably should stay in one duct inside of the snake and not spread through the body, because it could die from its own poison. So in that way, these beings who are Brahman give rise to mental projection, and you can see how it associates with the idea of other than Brahman, Maya, and then Brahman's Maya is actually having to be dealt with. I'm going through this fairly quickly because this is a chart that we have done before, but it's a very good illustrator for desires here. You can see how they come about then, if you're interested. So from Brahman's Maya, these beings who are engaging in Sankalpa perform action with desire. There's no place to go after Jiva's sport, after the lumen Jiva's sport there on the right-hand side. You can see there's just nowhere to go but back to Brahman. So whether they're in form or outside of form, they're not performing action with desire. That's one of the laws of karma yoga that both Ram and Sri Krishna give in the Adhyatma Ramayana and in the Bhagavad Gita. Do your actions free of desire. Don't desire the fruits of them would be one way of putting that. So because these beings are doing these actions with desire for things that are unreal, remember, vivarta happens as you look back on the teachings. This false covering comes over things and people fall for it. Remember, in the granary, you see, if they have bags of grain, and then the manager there, on the floor manager, he sees the rats getting into him, the mice. So he puffs a few grains of rice from the bags themselves, sweetens them, strews them around the bags, and he doesn't have to kill the mice or rats, and he doesn't have the problem of them spilling them all over the floor by ripping open the bags with their teeth. So they get waylaid, they get hypnotized, they get attracted away from the bags of rice and grain and go for these little sweet puffed fakes or imitations, little bits of it. So that's how Sri Ramakrishna talked about this world bewitching Maya, how it allures people away with just unreal things, things that are empty, things that don't have any real substance and don't have any real power to fulfill you. You're running after those and leaving yourself, which is the storehouse. It's the granary of divine wisdom. It's Brahman itself, yourself. And in India, this is where you learn this and become very assured of it. Well, you can see this sinkhole in the reef where the ocean waves flow over it, and then this water just drops in it. Well, this is what the tendency of desires happens, you see. The next thing after performing action with desire, you'd think, oh, well, maybe I can fulfill my desire. Depends. Good actions, mixed actions, or bad actions, or the next three. And so you can see one will have to live a dharmic life and try to keep the mind from falling into negative actions, but also a very perplexing kind of mixed karma. That's a combination of good and bad. It's like gray, indeterminate karma, and it is very misleading kind of karma. That's where we could pull out all the charts of Krishna and Ram about karma that we've studied before. And there you can see, because of this good and mixed and negative action, karmic accrual happens. That's where we would look at teachings of samskaras, which are coming up. We can deepen this teaching later. But for now, you just have to see that the cause brings about the effect, and things are not getting that much better. But you can see in terms of good actions and mixed actions and bad actions, the next level of karma is pleasure and pain happen from repeated activities, and they leave samskaric residue in the mind. So you'd have to know a little Sanskrit, you'd have to think about past lives, and you'd have to know that the mind, like the body, collects poisons, and it also collects nectars. And this is what the yogi, yogini, the practitioner, the disciplinary, the persons who's practicing sadhana, this is what they're looking for. If they've already fallen into this thought that I'm the body, I'm the world, or where did Brahman go? I don't believe in it anymore, or oh Lord, wherefore art thou? So this is what's happening, and this is where samskaras left in the mind will cause rebirth. And that's next is the formulation of samskaras, which are impressions for certain things. Everything from the impression that I'm a doctor, or I'm a thief, or I'm a menial worker, or I'm nobody, or I'm the greatest thing in the world. I mean, samskaras are of all kinds, and that's a residue stored in the mind that's going to predicate what you are, who you are, what you do, how you think in the next lifetime. So this is how thorough this relative truth of reincarnation gets presented to us in Indian Dharma. They prefer us just to concentrate on Brahman. Hear these teachings, think about Brahman, practice the Dharma. If negativities come your way, you've got a shield there, you're protected. But unfortunately for you, you're beginning to think this world has some real fulfilling power, and you're seeking out these little grains of sweetened rice instead of knowing about the whole storehouse of truth that lies deep within you. Those samskaras that are brought out form good karma, mixed karma, and negative karma. Going through this swiftly, and each one of those have a different fruit. Samskara skandhas happen from these, and on the left-hand side, that's where you get people who are erudite, wealthy, powerful. Maybe they're using their wealth and their power for what they think are good purposes, so that's the positive side. of these samskaras. There are people who are born. And there you see in the middle, there's samskaras associated with worldly existence. The samskaras associated with heavenly existence, then of course you'll find priests and wealthy people and people with power born with that. In the middle though, you'll see the altruist, the laborer, and the selfish, for example. Beings have worldly samskaras for worldly existence, and that's why so many people are born without true knowledge of themselves, the Atman, and its union with Brahman. And they're quite a ways down the sinkhole here, as you can see, fallen into this whole waterfall of desires and what they form. Samskara skandhas associated with diseased existence are there, which are the products of negative thinking, negative desires, negative karmas, that's turned people violent, deluded, and even impaired, mentally imbalanced. So all of this laid out this way, based in this teaching of desires and samskaras that form from them. And about this time you're talking about how many births do I have until I can free myself from these chains of bondage? Or what great soul can I go to who can snap the chains of rebirth for me? There's a beautiful song in our tradition to Sri Ramakrishna, O snapper of this world's, or breaker of this world's bonds, or snapper of this world's chains. Those links, if you go to a great soul like that, they can help you do away with these negative karmas in one life, even through their grace, or through even a touch sometimes. But definitely they'll like you to try and help them, listen to them, and follow their advice. It pretty much, in a quick view here, and in a few minutes we've looked at this, let's look at the final quote then. Those who long for objective existence will attain it via their own mental projections, but those who strive for yoga will perceive objects as being devoid of substance and will refrain from desire. So the top quote you have, thou art Brahman. In between you've got, you forgot that, well here's what you get. Reincarnation with desires. The bottom quote you have, don't ever forget to remember. And then realize that all objects are empty of substance. If you know they're devoid of substance, then you'll refrain from these desires. Otherwise, if you do it dharmically, then you can attain the object of your desire, which would be these good karmas and these good samskaras. That keeps the gate of higher truth open. So basically you can see something coming your way. You can see the light at the end of the tunnel in any given lifetime. You'll like meet a great soul, or you'll find your path in your guru. You'll hear the truth even in a dark age, like this age, and it'll appeal to you because you've kept these samskaras pure. So it's a beautiful system, probably the best of all relative systems, because we know that the soul's never born and never dies. All is Brahman. So then when you talk about Brahman's Maya, or the power of Maya to project name, form, time, and space with karma, cause and effect, that's called nama, rupa, desha, kala, and nimitta, then you're going to have to be very wary of it. These souls that here sported once and went back, they're called videha muktas and jiva muktas. So they're not going to touch this. If they come down here at all, they're going to do it as your eternal companion. There's a beautiful book in our tradition called Eternal Companion. That's going to be a soul that's realized and can take on the thought processes and look into the soul's destiny. And there are stories in Yoga Vasishtha about that, about Shukra falling into delusion from his meditation, and his father having to go to death and say, where did my son go? And death says, here, we can trace his soul in the cosmic record. And come with me, and of course they did this as mind bodies, not physical bodies. Come with me, we'll go down to where he's taken a birth, and we'll recover him and bring him back to his meditation. You don't find stories like that anywhere in the world, in any religion. This is in the Sanatana Dharma, and they'll just tell it to you like that. Then you'll have to go qualify yourself for understanding it and slough off this ignorance and come out of that shell like a snake out of its skin and be fresh and new and realize everything that's going on here based on the truth that all is Brahman. And then there's this covering power that's causing people to end up with desires and to suffer as a result. By that time, then it's going to be difficult to reverse the process. So that's why Ram is talking to the court of King Dasaratha early. I saw suffering out there, you'd all better beware. There's actually a warning in here he gives to people in Yoga Vasishtha. You don't know what I saw. You're just covered here by your nice life in the city of King Dasaratha, in the Koshala kingdom, where everything just looks pretty. And Vivekananda used to give us warnings like that. I remember my own teacher, Swami Sheshanandaji Maharaj, peace and bliss be upon him always, saying, you Americans better watch out. 1 world war has passed, 2 world wars have passed, there's a 3rd on the horizon. You better be careful. So it's not new to the world, but if you know the dynamics of what brings around about viciousness and deluded thinking and people with imbalanced minds, even those who get into power and become wealthy and so-called erudite, see, then you've got this mixture of samskaras, like a mixture of people in the world. And about that time you're saying, I think I will withdraw and renounce. Well, check in with us next month, and we have a seminar called How the Householder Renounces the World. How do we do it? We know how the monks do it, and to a certain extent. So it's a very powerful awakening that happens to certain souls, where and he's the great example for that at a very young age. Thousands of years later, Shankara was a great example for that. When he did it when he was, in 10, 12 years old, he was already left home, began looking for his teacher, and had recalled all this memory from past lifetimes. So India is very beautiful like that, with its scriptural history, its itihasa, and with its dharma teachings, and with its higher wisdom, and with its non-duality, which we just sang about, that Tulsi Das has found. Oh Lord, here's my prayer to thee. Cause my mind to quit perceiving duality everywhere, because only Brahman exists. If you didn't add that last part on, it wouldn't really make sense. And the Lord would say to you, what do you mean? This is just all dual here. But if you realize that only Brahman exists, or as it's put here, if you continue to fulfill your mental projections in the Dharma, then otherwise you'll realize that all these objects are devoid of substance, and you'll let them go. You'll renounce them. So that's what we want to look at in terms of desires, karma, samskaras, and rebirth. That how we expand this teaching in Yoga Vasishtha, where Ram is saying, yes, like a diamond-pointed sword, it cuts through everything, these desires. Now let's look and go on to a 4th level of this talk, where he's talking about Abhimana, or false identification. Now, that's of course out of ignorance that it's being done. And let me read what he says to the court to you, so we can keep track of him throughout this. False identification, Abhimana. Out of this Vairagya Prakarana, we're looking at a lot of it, how to detach. Here he says, bereft of the wise counsel of illumined souls around the transcendent reality, beings pour themselves into embodied existence as if it were reality itself, not knowing any better. Well, we just went through a whole chart on that, how they do that. Within this hazy cloud of mental nescience, I am afraid that everything in the three worlds is of no ultimate avail. This vaunted castle of vibrating projection, conjured by the cosmic collective and individual mind in Maya, is fated and ordained to come crashing down about the ears of all and sundry. Even the high-souled siddhas and devas, all egos, great and small, prideful and humble, will go to extinction. Worlds, both gross and subtle, will dissolve, as will the various suns which illuminate them. Gone, one's country, friends, and family, all in the blink of an eye. Our beloved mountains will be reduced to dust, and the seven seas evaporated as if they never existed. In the subtle realms, the devas and the asuras, that is, the gods and the demigods, will cease their endless fighting and bickering, and all will be scattered hither and thither. Who knows where? Over the boundless expanse of time and space. Out of these nether regions, higher and lower, all the hosts of heavenly beings will fall like rocks and rain, trembling into a chaotic dissolution of name and form. Tumbling into a chaotic dissolution of name and form. The holy triumvirate, Brahma, Vishnu, and Shiva, will merge like hailstones in the eternal ocean of supreme reality, and only it, that Brahman, which is completely devoid of the taint of conditioning, will remain. How would you like to hear that from a 14-year-old boy who's come to warn you of the troubles just outside your castle walls, outside your village door, outside your business? And maybe that's what we need to hear today as we fall into this Maya hypnotism and falsely identify with things which aren't real and forget to identify with the only reality. So he's putting it very succinctly here. He goes on, and of course it would then fall into a lot of reading, but we could probably avail ourselves and benefit further by looking at a teaching around it. So, Abhimana, false identification. Let's go to what happened to one great soul when he kept falling back from attaining the truth that he wanted. And this is in Yoga Vasishtha, the story of Uddalaka. So we have to start at the bottom of this chart. The quote there from Lord Vasishtha that he told Ram later again when he taught this: the fell disease of ignorance can only be removed through the divine panacea of mastery of mind, and not through any other means. Since the mind has projected all this, you take it to cast, you master it, you draw the senses back into it. How is that again? Like the legs of a tortoise as it draws it back into its shell when there's a danger coming about it, Krishna says. So the mind has to take the outgoing senses and draw them back in to the subtle senses. We'll look about that soon, because one of the next things coming is prana. And that prana goes out with the senses, but it can also be mastered and take the consciousness that's riding on those wings of prana back to its subtle source in the psychic prana, which is the energy of the mind, which moves things. So you could see there, and I'll give you a little running history of the story as we go along. Uddalaka tried many times to reach Nirvikalpa. He got very, very interested in non-dual truth, and he wanted to attain it and put to rest everything that Ram's talking about here once and for all. And he had advanced himself along the path. So this is kind of a common report and complaint of people who say, I've studied for a long time, who knows how many lifetimes, but at least in this time I've committed myself to the Dharma, I've walked the path, I've gotten a guru, I've practiced the mantra, I've practiced meditation and learned it. Where's the self-realization? Where's the enlightenment? Of course, the awakening has already happened, as Lord Buddha said, but moving towards this attack on the citadel or the gates of non-duality is a final pitch that the soul makes inward to attain this light of Brahman once and for all, as Ram has told us. So here's how he finally attained this, and we'll go through this quickly too in ascending fashion. He reasoned with his mind and told it, now you're going to practice neti-neti. Neti-neti is not this, until you find iti-iti, it is that, or all is that. So he reasoned with his mind and put his body in an inviolate posture. So from manana and yukti, or manana, thinking about the teachings that his guru gave him and the seers, he established one posture. That's the once and for all part of it. Ekasana it's called. Then he focused the mind. That's called dharana. And we know that's the sixth limb of yoga. So he focused the mind, and then he saw the prana running through the mind, and he practiced breathing, pranayama, to control the 5 pranas. 1 prana in 5 forms is how we understand that. And we'll look at that soon when we get to that part of Ram's discourse. He separated the senses from their objects. That's called pratyahara. So you can see that a lot of these are the limbs of yoga, asana, pranayama, pratyahara, but they're not necessarily put in that Patanjali form of order. So it happens to different souls. Uddalaka is a very advanced soul. He's just not getting the final satisfaction that he wants out of his practice, which would culminate in nirvikalpa, the destruction of all sankalpas, vikalpas that we were looking at this last chart, and the samskaras that go with them, and the desires that come from them, and the suffering that comes from that. All of this is going to be transcended. He's already gotten world weary about it, like Ram is here. And then this is the way he sits down and takes everything he's learned and puts it in an order. And this is the order it comes in this scripture, Yoga Vasishtha, the order that he tells. This is Lord Vasishtha telling Ram about the story of Uddalaka. And so he says, "Oh Ram, now you have to know how other souls attack this problem. This problem right now in Ram's mind is more for the sake of others. This is more for the sake of getting my initial realization. The avatar doesn't have to do that. It's a past master, even beyond a past master. But great souls like this who are getting close to the goal, they pull it all together. They pull in all the strands and focus in one final effort to break through these grantis, Brahma granti, Vishnu granti, Rudra granti, and move up, if you want to put it in Kundalini speak, move up the lotuses, the spiritual vortexes, penetrate them. These are the kind of things that you're going to have to master and spend time with for the ability to gain the ability to be so strong as to penetrate through these worlds. What did Ram just say? I'm sorry to say here, I'm beginning to expect that all 3 worlds are without any real benefit. Bhur Bhuva Swahar. You can't get fulfillment there. You're going to have to come to the 4th world in the heart and look back on the 3 and try and have mercy and compassion. That's what the avatar do. But if you reach the 4th center, you've still got a boat race to run, as Ramakrishna used to say, between the heart, the throat, and the 3rd eye center. So this is deep spiritual life, and direct experience comes about here. So everything that you've had to learn here, which Uddalaka has done, I'm just saying he's put this all together in one final effort. So, concentration of the mind, one posture, reasoning the mind, one posture, concentration, getting your breathing together, and getting rid of all distractions, separating the senses from their objects, finally. Then, finally, vairagyam, render objects non-existent with clear discernment. Now, this is so great. Vasishtha is one of the 10 mind-born sons of Lord Brahma, who was there at the very beginning of a cosmic cycle, which I chanted at the beginning of this class. Out of the Supreme Brahman came this trinity at the beginning of a cosmic cycle. And when they came out, the Vedas, the Upanishads, these great teachings were vouchsafed to them, and therefore to their sons, the avatars, for instance, and the 10 mind-born sons. So this is where you get this clear vairagyam, this clarity, this lucidity is a nice word I heard yesterday. Render objects non-existent with clear discernment. You can't do that till you separate the senses who desire them from them. You see, what soul that still desires objects is going to say, I'm going to render you non-existent. I want you to be existent. Then I can enjoy you. So this is a whole different run, and we looked at it, beings who do their acts and their thoughts with desire, as compared to beings who are trying to get free from that very desire. We just looked at that chart. After vairagyam, he closed the 9 gates of the body. Indriya Jaya is how that's called in Tantra. You close the 9 gates of the body. Then you fasten the mind in the heart and simulate death. That's called dhyan. Maybe you don't know it that when you're meditating, going into deep sleep, so that's simulating death. Or as Vivekananda said, the minute we're born, we're rushing towards death. So we don't think death is morbid. We know it's not real because our soul is eternal. So we can go ahead and simulate it and try it on. See, I think, what's it like to be dead? You see, what's it like not to have senses? What's it like not to have thoughts all the time? Because my desires, my samskars, and everything are carried by my thoughts. So if I got rid of them, could I see this beautiful formlessness that they talk about? The light of Brahman? Could I experience that for myself? It's all a matter of reason, which he was doing back there at the Manana stage. So what I'm saying here is Uddalaka is an interesting study and a good story to tell the young avatar about by Vasishtha's own words, because he's gathering all this together. He doesn't have to go learn it and then gather it together. You see what I'm saying? All these things are already in them. He just hasn't put them together yet in the right mixture to force that door of non-duality open, or to throw it open, or to cajole it open, whatever. So he's putting this all together from elements that are already within him. That's the most beautiful part to me of this story. It's like, oh, I don't have to go learn asana. I don't have to, control my senses. I don't have to go do this. I've already done that. Now I just have to put it together into one orderly ascent, what I like to call inward ascension. And you can see he's about to reach a dotted line on the chart there. So he finally destroys the mind's tendency towards thought forms. It's very much following what Patanjali talked about, savitarka, nirvitarka, savichara, nirvichara, sananda, sasmita. If you studied the samadhis of Patanjali's yoga, the Ashtanga yoga, then you know that a lot of this is being made available to the soul, who is destroying the tendency towards thought forms. Before, it was all objects, wasn't it, and senses. So I know that's not the truth. I should be able to manage this. I have, and now I know, and I probably knew this before, that all of these things came from my mind. that objects came from thoughts, not from God, and not only from nature, because nature's insentient. It was myself that got in here and extracted all these things from nature, put them together, congealed them, including senses, put them on objects in worlds that I formulated, and got attached to them and suffered. Now I'm taking it all back. It's just like a 24-hour day in your life. A good day, a bad day. You see, a good karma, a bad karma, or a mixed day. Every day you want to make a good day, don't you? Every breath you want to make in Brahman. Every thought you must have about Dharma. This is what you need and to transform everything around you in the way that Uddalaka is masterfully doing it already, because he does attain the goal here, finally, in this story in Yoga Vasishtha. So this is beautiful, the way it puts together yoga and Vedanta, I think. And it's a part of Vasishtha's yoga. So I was about to say, you can see why Patanjali and Vedavyas later on, much down the line, looked back at a great seer like Vasishtha, if they weren't that seer themselves, and said, he had it right back in that yuga. Of course he did, because they were very knowledgeable then. They were aware, they were awake. They knew Brahman existed. They had no doubt about Brahman. And they did have doubt about the processes that are going on, especially if they took the soul away from Brahman, like we just saw in that last chart with the whole waterfall and the reef there. So all of this up to the dotted line, you can see here on the side, it has to do with sadhana, and then savikalpa, and then nirvikalpa. Nirvikalpa is where he wants to end up. So he has to do Advaita Vedanta sadhana here with with everything. So you can see the sidebar on the left going up there to that dotted line. When his practice, his inward practice, had become focused to a sharp point, then he could get into the savikalpa level. And to him, it's probably, this is familiar ground to me. I mean, this is where I spent most of my life after my practice phase, in savikalpa samadhi. I think maybe today some practitioners don't know that they're experiencing savikalpa samadhis and different levels of samadhi, even with objects. If you're not attached to them, you don't desire them, then they become things of exquisite enjoyment, quote Vivekananda, not just mere enjoyment, or especially not enjoyment that makes you attached to them, so that you can't get it anymore. You try and get more of it out of that. What happened? You fulfilled me before, you're not doing it anymore? So you've got these levels of enjoyment in everything. There's boga, and then there's yoga and boga, and then there's finally just yoga, if you want to put it that way. Boga means enjoyment. So when he reaches the familiar ground of savikalpa, you can see that viveka gyan is the basis there. How to discriminate away avidya and behold the heart's light. So here we have avidya up here, agyan. It's another word for it, root ignorance. So that, don't be surprised. You thought maybe it went away earlier. It's not that way in Patanjali's yoga, and that's not that way in the avatar's mind, is it? Ram is complaining about it. So he's waiting for the right moment to apply that viveka gyan, just like Uddalaka is doing here. He's holding that back, saying, I know what I'm going to do when I get there, because I've been there before in savikalpa. Savikalpa is a high state with imaginings, with envisionings. With kalpas, there is a time where time begins to stretch and be malleable. So I've been there in meditation. I've been there when I've pondered the scriptures. That's why back here in Manana, it's an easy thing for him to do already. This is why for others, they need to ground themselves in those things so they can use these tools later when it comes time. It's a beautiful story in Vasishtha, and this chart illustrates it very well. So into savikalpa samadhi, he passes. inwardly, and he discriminates away this slight bit, tendril of avidya, that's the slight bit of the presence of Maya and suffering in Ram's mind. Pretty much the same thing along two different trajectories. Then he comes to this great light, Brahmajyoti. Now, he's probably come to that light before and felt incapacitated, as many people are, thrown back from that light. And just, Sri Ramakrishna said, strike a match in a dark room. That's sort of like what this illumination is like. But we're to think that that match strike, before you're ready to see the great light, is more like an insight, and it burns out, and you have to strike another match and another match at higher levels, in deeper worlds, at different echelons of your own intelligence, until you reach this ability to acquire a torch, not just a match, and keep the cave of the mind lit for all time. So perceive this great light and overcome that incapacity. I took that out of the scripture because I thought this is what caused Uddalaka to fall back before. Unfortunately, right now what's causing people in this day and age, in our culture and in the world generally, to fall back is pratyahara. They haven't separated the senses from the objects and be able to free themselves. That's the fifth limb of yoga. If you can't get pratyahara, then you can't concentrate, you can't meditate, and you can't get samadhi. So this is the difference in this level of soul that Uddalaka is and most practitioners. He's not just an adept practitioner anymore. He's a soul that's knocking on the door of highest realization. And it just takes his final decision to say, I will do that. I will pass. So dimension of incapacity is very powerful there. That he's had this feeling of weakness in light before, and wants to penetrate through that. There is another story in Yoga Vasishtha similar to this, where the great seeker reaches the light and gets totally what's the word? Not incapacitated, but dizzied. He's like thrown off trajectory, and has to regroup himself. They say that this third chakra, Agya chakra, that's the word I was looking for actually, disorientation. Souls get disoriented there because the light is so immediate and so powerful. If the mind is used to being distracted, like it is down here in the lower levels of practice, it'll get distracted there, don't you worry. But if the mind has been concentrated at lower levels of practice, when it sees that third eye open, it'll go, what is that? And the next question will be, am I ready to go there? So Uddalaka has also seen that and fallen back. And we must put in here that it's also a matter of Divine Mother's auspicious timing to when a soul is going to depart the body. There's teachings on that in the Gita by Sri Krishna, of course, the timeliness of the whole thing. But you see how deep it's getting in the Salvikalpa level. So Swapna Jyoti comes next. To master the tendency towards sleep and unconsciousness. I'm sorry, Swapna Jaya. So Jaya means, Swapna Jaya, before it was Brahma Jyoti. So Swapna Jaya, Swapna means dream really, so this dream sleep that's going on, even at a very high level, because souls do go into high levels of dream, higher heavens, and they go into deep sleep, which is sort of a simulated Nirikalpa, isn't it? We talk about simulation of death. You can also simulate the light, and it'd be like standing at a distance and tasting it. Sri Ramakrishna once told the young Naren, talk about the young avatar level of soul, he said, if you were a fly and you saw a bowl of nectar in the room, what would you do? And Naren said, oh, I would go up to the bowl of nectar, fly up to it, and I would sit on the edge, crane my neck out, stick my tongue out, and just sip that little bits of that nectar, being very careful not to fall in and die. And Ramakrishna laughed at his young disciple and said, you can't die in that notion of nectar. That's eternal life there. You should rather jump in and dive in. So there are songs about that. Dive deep, O mind, in the ocean of God's mercy and light. If you descend to the uttermost depths, there you will find the gem of love. Go seek, O mind, wisdom's shining lamp, and with it, so it goes on like this. Go seek Vrindavan in your heart, where Krishna sports with his devotees. Has these beautiful lines to this song, all under that opening premise of dive deep, dive deep. So this is what Uddalaka is going to have to do here. He has to overcome the incapacity or the fear of that light swallowing him and give up his ego and get rid of then that final tendency to maybe be just compromise a bit and go into unconsciousness. Like we go into deep sleep from dream. Okay, I can give up the dream. I'm tired of that dream. Now maybe I'll just go into a kind of unconscious state, and I'll call that deep sleep. If I come back and deep sleep didn't transform me, so I dream that night, next night I go back into deep sleep again, come back again into dream, come to waking. So deep sleep was a simulation, but it never transformed anyone. It will if you take your consciousness with you into deep sleep, we like to say, and that's what Uddalaka's practiced doing in all his previous attempts to attain samadhi. Samadhi at different levels. Seated, as the father of yoga would say, sabija or sampragyata, and unseated, nirbija or asampragyata. This very same yogic teaching came about then, and Vedavyas was also then on hand later to call it savikalpa and nirvikalpa, taking the lead of Patanjali, the father of yoga, from some hundreds of years earlier, and him taking that lead, and both of them taking that lead from great souls, mind-blowing souls of Lord Brahma, like Lord Vasishtha, who lived back in an age where the avatar was there on hand. Imagine being the teacher of a young avatar. You'd talk about qualification you'd need to have. So that tendency towards sleep, let's call that nidra samadhi, because it's not the kind of sleep we're talking about, which is dull and droll and you wake up from it drugged feeling, not being able to wake up. So as he approaches nirvikalpa samadhi, then there's one more thing here, and this is exactly what, in maybe a slightly different form, Sri Rama is dealing with right now. Moha, vinasha. He has to destroy delusion. The delusion of what? In Ram's case, the delusion that this suffering that he saw outside his father's palace is actually real. If you go about to try and do away with it, you wouldn't be able to do that. Who can get rid of the suffering in the world? But if you went about going out and telling people it's not real, that would wake them up, you see. So that's where the fire-darting reformers and those who are preaching sin and damnation and various things are trying to help people in various ways, whatever the case may be, are going along the wrong path. They're barking up the wrong tree. You have to try and find a way to convince people that their suffering is from ignorance due to a false superimposition. None of it's real. Only Brahman is real. Isn't that what your guru told you? Isn't that the first thing you heard from Vedanta? Didn't they tell you to concentrate on that? When you came out of Brahman, did you ever want to lose that and fall into this whirlpool? Or did you just want to take a look at it and go back and report it? You see, oh, guess what I saw there? See? And I'm actually talking about that literally because at the beginning, I could read it to you sometime in this next series of classes, Lord Brahma does put Vasishtha into a spell and takes away his knowledge of the Atman, says a mantra, and then watches his son go into this tailspin, talk about a tailspin, and then took the curse away. And Vasishtha said, "What did you do to me, Father?" And he said, "Well, I wanted you to know what they feel like down on earth, on the Burloka, because you have to go there in your next lifetime. You have to accompany the avatar there and help him remove this subtle distinction or sense or tendril that the primal moha is actually real, because only Brahman is real. How can those two exist? Can darkness lay on light?" Ramanuja said. So basically, this is the tiniest little tendril of unknowing, of maybe the last vestige of the curtain of nescience that's in the mind, that Uddalaka says, "I'm going to be rid of it. I'm going to transcend it 100% and dive deep into that ocean of nectar once and for all. I don't care what happens after that. I don't care if I ever come back." Sounds like Lord Buddha, doesn't it? "Have no hope for me for the worlds of name and form forevermore. I'm gone and gone forever." So when you make that final decision that only Brahman is real, you're done with dreaming, and you certainly want to get as far away from suffering, lifetimes of suffering, as you can. Then you do what Uddalaka did, and you penetrate through that final granthi, the root of granthi, and you get into nirvikalpa. So there it is. He realized nirvikalpa samadhi. What do you call it? Sata Samanya was Vasishtha's way of talking about it. It goes beyond Turiya state. So we see that Lord Vasishtha knew about the way that Advaita teaches waking, dreaming, deep sleep, and the Shvara. The word has been there from the very beginning, isn't it? In the beginning was the word, it was with Brahman, it was Brahman, if you want to put it there. So you're going to go beyond the word too, and beyond the Turiya state. So that's what Vasishtha calls Sata Samanya. It's got a very, very high level. If maybe it's no more a level. It's just a thing in itself. And it would also transcend this play of Jivan Mukti. You see, like, oh, I have to come here and show people how to be a living, liberated soul. Or I just want to take one more sojourn out, and then I'll give up all bodies. Videha means without bodies. Mukti means liberated. So he's liberated beyond all bodies, never needs to take them again. I personally think that Vivekananda blended these two, that he was both. And finally, ability to merge with the Atman, once and for all in this case, and transcendence of visible things, and freedom from mental thought forms. This is a kind of summation of what just happened below the two dotted lines on this chart, leading up to what's called Sata Samanya. Now, is there a return from Nirvikalpa? You would have to refuse any occult power and transcend heavenly existence and reject personal lordship. That's a beautiful facet in that story about Uddalaka. You can see how they're all very important. Let's bypass occult powers right now, because that's a very high level of occult power you're talking about. But it does get reflected in heavenly existence. Just some souls, pralaya, they like to get free of projected existence and worlds and everything, so that they can master them and utilize them for their own desire, for their own enjoyment. So that still keeps in them this sense of coming back again to enjoy heavenly existence in these worlds that we're talking about that exist And it's also reflected well in the gods and the demigods. We call suras and asuras in our tradition, is that they still want personal lordship. So that's called prakriti laya. They want prakriti. They want to master prakriti, which itself is a very powerful thing, which many beings are doing. But that's where the occult power part of it comes in. When they master prakriti, its external and its internal form, manifested and unmanifested form, they turn their nose up at the powers that come from it. Sri Ramakrishna did that. Do you want my powers? They came to me in meditation. He asked the young Swami Vivekananda, will they help me? Vivekananda returned. No, probably not. They might even hinder you. I don't want them then. So it was a quick conversation, and Vivekananda showed that, and later talked about that sloka in Patanjali's Loka, where the realized soul eschews the occult powers and goes for the rain cloud of virtues. Dharma, mega, like you got a lot of dharma there. Dharma, mega samadhi, goes for that. So this is the explanation of how it's not just a matter of, oh, I don't want those occult powers. It's that, oh, there's something much better than that, and I mastered prakriti to get that. Whereas with the gods and goddesses, they're stuck. They're stuck being a god or a goddess or a prakriti laya for cycles of time, yugas. So that's where this teaching of mankind is the soul that has this most powerful ability. Mankind is that soul. As it can get free in one lifetime. Can get free in one effort. Uddalaka is showing us how to do that. Vasishtha is reporting that to the young avatar. Oh, it's happened before, my son, in these ages before you, and it can happen again. So don't take this Maya to be real. Don't take ignorance to be real. Don't take false superimposition to be real. Don't take this misassociation to be real. Don't take desires to be real. And everything that comes from them, called suffering, suffering in the worlds of name and form, none of that is real, because only Brahman is real. And that's where we come to a Vedanta Dindima, an ultimate conclusion that India has made, both in its religion and its philosophy, and then they join the two together, Sanatana Dharma. That's what gives it its adhering power, its sticking power, its eternal existence in the minds of all beings. Because even the gods are interested in these teachings. They know where they are. Indra knows that he's very high on the list of gods and goddesses, but he's looking inward to the Trinity. And the Trinity is much more closer to Brahman than he is. So he's saying, how did I get myself into all of this? I better be careful of this problem of occult powers at a very high level. I must eschew heavenly existence because I'll want to desire beautiful things in heaven, which is actually reflects really nice in the religions of today out here, seeking heaven, the heaven-seeking senses. And then I'm also going to want to be very careful of this personal lordship. There's only one God, one Lord, and that is Ram. Let's say one Lord that comes into form, and that's why they sing so beautifully about it, him, her, sometimes. So that's where our devotions go to. When we're in a body, and we need an ideal, as Vivekananda said, it goes to those great souls. And then we would sing to them. If it were Ram, for instance, we would sing something like this, which many of us have heard and sung before. Raghupati Raghava Raja Ram Patita Pavana Sita Ram Jaya Raghupati Raghava Raja Ram Patita Pavana Sitaram, Sitaram Jaya Sitaram, Vaja Pyare tu Sitaram, Sitaram Jaya Sitaram, Vaja Pyare tu Sitaram. Ishvara Allah Tero Naam, Sabako Sanmati De Bhagavan. Ishvara Allah Tero Naam, Sabako Sanmati De Bhagavan. Jaya Raghupati Raghava Rajaram, Patita Pavana Sitaram. Om. Bhadram Karnibhihi Shrinayamu Devaha, Bhadram Paschema Akhyabirya Jatraha, Stirai Rangayish Tushtuvam Sastanavir, Vishema Devahitam Yadayahu. May we see with these eyes what is good and spiritual, and hear with ears what is noble and uplifting. May we, while worshipping the Lord and Mother, with healthy minds and bodies, live a life which is beneficial to ourselves and to all other beings. Om peace. Peace, peace. May peace be unto us, may peace be unto all. Om Hari Om, Hari Om, Hari Om Tat Sat.